she drew the line with a smile. "One more step and I'm yours." And I, unable to look away, whispered back, "Then don't blink." The first time I noticed her, the world felt unusually quiet. It wasn't silence exactly, there was still the muted clink of porcelain from the cafe counter, the soft shuffle of someone stacking chairs in the corner, but compared to the noise inside my head, the atmosphere had a hushed weight to it. Evening light pressed through the tall windows, filtering gold into the room, catching dust motes that drifted lazily as though they had nowhere urgent to be. And there she was, sitting by herself, tucked into the far corner where the lamplight reached just enough to frame her in warmth. Her posture was unhurried, elegant in its ease, as though she belonged to that moment more than anyone else in the room. A book rested in her hand, the kind that looked worn at the edges, like it had lived as much as its reader had. Her other hand, slender and steady, traced the rim of a coffee cup without really touching it, just the absent gesture of someone lost in thought. I told myself not to stare. I've always been careful with that, careful not to intrude, not to mistake admiration for permission. Still, my eyes betrayed me. They caught on the details, the way her hair slipped forward when she tilted her head to read, the faint press of her lower lip when the sentence lingered longer than expected. She looked untouchable. Not in the sense of distance, but in the sense that the world around her bent itself into stillness, letting her exist uninterrupted. And yet, there was something beneath it. A kind of solitude, quiet but palpable. Like she carried more stories than the book in her hand could ever hold. I shifted in my chair, the scrape of wood against tile sounding far too loud. Her eyes lifted then, steady, clear, and aware. Not startled, not annoyed, just present. And for a moment, it was as if I'd been caught trespassing somewhere sacred. That's when I noticed the air between us. Strange how space can feel different depending on who occupies it. The distance wasn't far, yet it stretched wide enough to remind me she was older, poised, certain in herself in ways I was still figuring out. It should have made me retreat, but instead, it grounded me. My hands curled around the warm ceramic of my cup, steadying myself, the faint aroma of roasted beans rising with the steam. I remember thinking how absurd it was to feel nervous in a room so ordinary. And yet, something about her shifted the air, sharpened the edges of the night. I didn't speak then. I didn't need to. The beginning of a story doesn't always arrive with words, it arrives with awareness. With the sound of her page turning like the soft exhale of a secret. With the way her glance lingered just a breath too long before dropping back to the book. And in that quiet, without either of us knowing it yet, something had begun. I had been careful not to intrude on her stillness, content to sit in my corner and simply exist in the same space. But then, she looked up from her book, eyes steady, carrying that unspoken strength I'd already noticed. And with the faintest lift of her brow, she spoke. Her words weren't random. They were measured, deliberate, half remark, half test. Something about the way she said it carried an edge of teasing, but also a boundary. A line drawn with elegance. "Careful," she said softly, eyes glinting in the lamplight, "if you keep watching me like that, I'll start to think you have questions you're too shy to ask." It wasn't sharp. It wasn't cold. But it was the kind of statement that left no room for pretense. My heart stumbled. Most people would have laughed nervously, muttered an apology, maybe looked away. But something in her tone, firm but not unkind, pulled the truth out of me. So I answered honestly. No cleverness, no charm, just the first thing that rose in me. "Maybe I do," I said, holding her gaze longer than I thought I could. That surprised her. Just barely, but enough. I caught the flicker in her expression, the tiny pause at the corner of her mouth. The kind of pause that meant she hadn't expected me to meet her words with anything but retreat. The space between us shifted. What had been quiet observation became a fragile thread of connection. Not binding, not heavy, just enough to feel. Her voice was warm but controlled as she leaned back slightly in her chair, studying me. The distance of years between us wasn't invisible. I could feel it in her poise, the way she carried herself, the calm assurance in her eyes. Yet somehow, my unpolished honesty seemed to level the table, if only for a moment. I noticed details then, the kind you don't forget. The way the lamplight deepened the curve of her cheekbone. How her fingers rested on the edge of the page but didn't turn it. How her breathing slowed ever so slightly when she realized I wasn't going to look away. Around us, the cafe kept its rhythm, mugs clinking faintly, chairs being stacked, someone humming to themselves behind the counter. But none of it seemed to reach us. We were folded into our own quiet corner, caught in a moment that didn't feel like it belonged to the rest of the room. For the first time, I spoke again without hesitation. "It's not that I'm shy," I admitted. "It's just, not every day you meet someone who makes silence feel worth keeping." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, not yet, but something softer. And when she finally lowered her eyes back to her book, it wasn't to dismiss me. It was almost as though she was giving me permission to stay. And in that simple exchange, with barely more than a handful of words, I realized the story had shifted. It wasn't just mine anymore. After that first exchange, I thought the air between us might settle. That maybe she'd go back to her book, and I'd quietly sip my coffee, each of us retreating to the safe comfort of our own corners. But it didn't. Instead, something lingered. Something unspoken, threaded into the quiet like music too faint to name. Her gaze lifted now and then, not directly, not obviously, but in small, almost unconscious glances. Each time, it felt like a tide brushing closer to the shore, only to pull away again before it touched. And I felt it, in the restless drumming of my fingers against the side of my glass, in the way my shoulders tensed and relaxed like they couldn't quite decide what to do with themselves. Silence no longer felt empty. It felt alive. Charged. She shifted in her chair, leaning just slightly forward, and I caught the faintest brush of her sleeve against the edge of the table. It was nothing, really, just fabric whispering against wood, but somehow it made the space feel smaller. Closer. That was when the thought crept in, uninvited. What would she think if she knew what I was feeling? It was a dangerous thought. Because beneath my admiration, beneath the quiet respect I felt for her presence, something deeper had begun to stir. Something I wasn't supposed to let myself consider. She was older, more grounded, with a life already shaped by choices I hadn't even had to face yet. I knew this. But knowing didn't erase the warmth building in my chest every time her eyes lingered a second longer than they needed to. I could see it in her, too, though she tried to keep it tucked behind composure. The way she held her cup a heartbeat longer before setting it down, as though steadying herself. The faint curve at the edge of her lips that she smoothed away too quickly. And the softness in her breathing, just slow enough to betray that she was paying attention to more than just the words on her page. The distance between us wasn't measured in feet anymore. It was measured in pauses, in glances, in the fragile restraint that kept us from moving closer. I leaned forward, resting my elbows lightly on the table. The wood was cool beneath my skin, a grounding reminder that the world was still real, still outside this charged little corner we had made. My voice caught in my throat, though I hadn't spoken. I didn't need to. Because she felt it too, I could see it in the way her eyes lifted, meeting mine, holding just long enough to make my chest tighten before she looked away again. And in that stillness, I realized something: words weren't always the beginning. Sometimes it was silence that carried the heaviest weight. Sometimes it was the things we didn't say that pulled us closer than any confession ever could. And in that moment, without touching, without moving, we were already standing at the edge of something neither of us dared to name. The silence between us had grown into something neither of us could ignore. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was waiting. Like a door standing half open, daring one of us to step through. She was the first to move. Not with a grand gesture, not with the kind of boldness her confidence might have suggested. Instead, it came quietly, tucked inside a single breath as she closed her book and set it aside. Her hand lingered on the cover for a moment, fingers brushing against the worn spine as though the story inside was easier than the one unfolding here. When she finally looked at me, there was something different in her eyes. The sharp wit that had guarded her earlier softened, revealing something far more fragile. "You seem like someone who listens," she said. Her voice was steady, but quieter now, as if she didn't want the words to carry too far. I nodded, not daring to interrupt. She looked down briefly, tracing the rim of her cup with her finger before speaking again. "It's been a long time since I've let anyone sit this close. A pause, and then the faintest laugh. Close without expectations. Her words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. She wasn't talking about the physical space between us. She was talking about something deeper, the distance she had kept from people, maybe from herself, for longer than she cared to admit. I didn't rush to fill the silence. It felt like a moment that needed to breathe. I leaned forward, resting my forearms lightly against the table, my voice dropping almost to a whisper. I don't expect anything. Except maybe, the truth. Her eyes lifted to mine again, searching, as though she needed to be sure I meant it. And in that look, I saw it, the quiet weight she carried, the part of her that the world rarely saw. The strength everyone admired wasn't without its cracks, and in this moment, she was letting me glimpse one. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just a fraction. I used to believe closeness was simple, she admitted. You meet someone, you share, you trust, but it's not that simple anymore. People leave. Or they stay, but not the way you need them to. And after a while, you stop letting anyone near enough to matter. Her honesty struck me harder than any sharp remark could have. Because beneath her composure, beneath her calm, was a loneliness I recognized even if I hadn't lived enough years to wear it as gracefully as she did. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't say it would be different with me. Instead, I let the moment speak for itself. My hand shifted slightly on the table, not reaching for hers, but close enough that the possibility was there. She noticed. I could tell by the way her breath caught, by the faint hesitation before her fingers brushed mine as if by accident. The touch was fleeting, just the whisper of skin against skin, but it carried more weight than words could hold. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a confession. It was something quieter, simpler. It was permission. And in that permission, I felt her guard lower. Not completely, not recklessly, but just enough to let me see the woman behind the strength. The woman who, despite everything, still wanted to be understood. By then, the cafe had nearly emptied. Chairs were stacked, lights dimmed, the outside world pressing faintly at the windows with the glow of street lamps and passing cars. But neither of us seemed ready to move. The moment had taken hold of us, stretched, delicate, unbroken. I stood first. Not to leave, not really. Just to steady myself. The legs of my chair scraped softly against the floor, and the sound seemed louder than it should have been in the quiet. She looked up at me, her eyes holding mine with a calm I couldn't quite read. Something in me wanted to walk away, to protect both of us from the weight of what was growing between us. But something stronger held me still, the way her gaze didn't let go, the way her hand lingered around her cup though she hadn't touched it in minutes. I took a slow breath, about to thank her for the conversation, about to retreat into safe distance, when she stopped me. Her voice was low, almost playful but lined with something more fragile beneath it. One more step, she murmured, and I'm yours. It wasn't a declaration. It was a dare. A test wrapped in a smile. And yet, beneath that teasing tone, there was a truth she couldn't quite hide, an admission that she felt the same pull I did, and it terrified her just enough to mask it with challenge. For a heartbeat, I froze. The words struck deeper than she could have known. My pulse quickened, a flush of heat running through me as if the space between us had caught fire. Her eyes held steady on mine, unwavering. I noticed the small details, the slight tension in her jaw, the way her hand stilled on the table, the faint rise and fall of her chest. She looked composed, yes, but her body betrayed her. This mattered to her, maybe more than she wanted me to realize. The world seemed to narrow to that single step she spoke of. The space between us wasn't more than a few feet, but it felt like the crossing of an ocean. On one side was safety, distance, the polite boundary we could both hide behind. On the other, everything unknown. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My voice came steadier than I felt. Then don't blink, I said. Her lips parted just slightly, as if my reply had caught her off guard. Not because of the words themselves, but because I had met her challenge without hesitation. And for a moment, neither of us moved. The stillness was heavier than silence, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. Her gaze didn't falter. Not once. And yet, I could see the shift in her, the faint tremor of vulnerability behind her composure, the softening at the corners of her mouth that betrayed a secret relief. That step, the one she had dared me to take, had already happened. Not with my feet, not with movement, but with words. The line she had drawn was already crossed the moment I answered. And though I didn't move closer, though my body stayed still, I knew we had already closed the distance between us. The words left me before I even thought about them, steady in sound but trembling inside me. They hung there in the air, caught between us, too bold to take back and too honest to regret. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she really looked at me, in a way that stripped the room bare. Her eyes didn't flicker or falter, they locked onto mine, holding, searching, as though trying to decide what lived behind my daring words. The silence stretched, longer and longer, and with every passing second my chest tightened. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain she could hear it. Yet I didn't look away. I couldn't. I meant what I said, and she knew it. Her breath shifted first. A small, almost imperceptible change, quicker at the inhale, slower at the exhale. She wasn't unaffected. Beneath her calm exterior, something was trembling too. The room around us faded to the background. The barista wiping counters, the faint hum of traffic outside, none of it mattered anymore. All that existed was the space between her steady gaze and my own. Her lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. Instead, she pressed them together softly, a flicker of uncertainty passing across her face. Vulnerability. It was brief, but I caught it. That single crack in her composure felt like the most intimate thing she could have shown me. I took half a step forward, not enough to reach her, just enough to acknowledge the gravity of her dare. The floor creaked lightly under my weight, and the sound seemed to echo in the quiet. Her hand, resting on the table, shifted. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers traced absent circles against the wood, a restless gesture at odds with the calmness of her expression. The tension in her body was written in small details, the faint tightening of her shoulders, the way her chin lifted just slightly higher as if bracing herself. We stood like that for what felt like forever, her holding her breath, me holding my ground. The moment wasn't about speaking anymore. It was about waiting. Waiting to see who would yield first, who would break the stillness with either retreat or surrender. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. My words had already crossed the line, and now it was her choice to decide if she would let me. Finally, she blinked. Not out of dismissal, not to end the moment, but like someone releasing a breath they'd been holding too long. Her gaze softened, her shoulders lowered a fraction, and I saw it, the acceptance. Not full, not reckless, but enough to let me know she hadn't built these walls to keep me out forever. And in that tiny shift, in that blink she had sworn against, I felt everything change. The tension didn't dissolve, it transformed. From sharp, aching suspense into something warmer, deeper. Something that felt like permission. It wasn't a collapse of tension, not a sudden unraveling of everything we'd been holding back, it was softer than that. Like the first drop of rain on a dry street, small but certain, telling you a storm is coming whether you're ready or not. Her eyes didn't leave mine, but they weren't daring me anymore. They were searching, weighing, almost tender in their honesty. For the first time that evening, I felt like she wasn't guarding herself. She was just there. I stayed still, afraid that any movement might break the fragile spell between us. My breath slowed, steady now, matching hers without meaning to. And in that quiet harmony, I felt something I hadn't expected, safety. Not the kind born from distance or walls, but the kind born from being seen, completely, without needing to explain. Then she moved. It was subtle, careful. She rose from her chair, the soft scrape of wood against tile sounding louder than it should have. For a second she hesitated, fingers brushing the table as if to steady herself. And then one step. Not bold, not rushed, just enough to close the space between us. She stood close enough now that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the faint scent of her perfume carrying notes of jasmine and something earthier, steadier. My pulse picked up, not with urgency, but with an ache I couldn't quite name. Her hand lifted slowly, pausing midair as though she were giving herself one last chance to pull away. But she didn't. Instead, her palm came to rest gently against my chest. The touch wasn't heavy, wasn't claiming. It was light, just her hand resting there, feeling the rhythm of my heartbeat beneath her fingers. And yet, that simple contact said more than words could. She was letting me close, letting herself be closer. I lowered my gaze, only slightly, to watch the quiet strength in her expression. Her lips pressed together softly, her breath steady but deeper now, as if the weight of the evening had finally settled. Without thinking, my hand lifted too, hovering for a moment before brushing against her arm. The fabric of her sleeve was cool beneath my fingertips, but the warmth of her skin beneath it was unmistakable. She didn't flinch. If anything, she leaned into it, her body angling just slightly toward mine.